Let's go over some brush techniques and tips. These will be very, very helpful for you in terms of being able to know how to use your brush to the best effect for the glazing technique. And these are 5 different tips that I use in my portrait painting and I teach to my students. But I've never really compiled a whole list of these tips and techniques, and I want to do that for you here in this class. So let's do this. Tip number 1 is to use more pressure at the beginning and less at the end. I'm going to demonstrate this for you on this blank canvas here, and we've got a little bit of paint. This is raw umber dark, one of my favorite pigments, and then we're going to add some matte medium. So I'm going to just kind of introduce you to the glazing technique before we even get into the painting here. So we just put down some matte medium there on the palette. Again, the glazing technique, when you boil it down, is a little bit of pigment and a lot of the clear medium. I know it looks white, but it dries crystal clear. But let me show you this first technique of using more pressure at the first part and then less at the end. We'll just call it kind of the more and less technique. So let's take a little bit of this raw umber dark and mix it with matte medium, and we get a ratio, of maybe 95% matte medium, 5% paint, something like that. But just so you can see it better, I'm going to actually make this one a little more robust. So maybe more like a 90-10 ratio, 90% matte medium, 10% paint. So you can really see this better here on the canvas. And so then basically the idea is to use more pressure, okay, at the beginning, and you're going to hold the brush almost kind of perpendicular. Hold it perpendicular to the canvas and really get that glaze to go in to the weave of the canvas. A lot of pressure. Okay, squeeze that paint out, and then you smooth it out. And we use a couple of different brush strokes, and that actually takes us to tip number 2, is to use a variety of brush strokes. Notice I went diagonally in both directions, and then I went horizontally. I can also then finally smooth that out going vertically, and that gives us a nice even sheen. Now, just so you can see this better, I'm going to make a glaze that's just a little more robust than this. We're going to add a little more raw umber dark, so it's more opaque, a little less transparent or translucent. And transparent just means the light shines through it completely. Translucent means that the light shines through it partially. But let's go ahead and take a look here. So I'm going to show you that same idea. Lots of pressure. Okay, lots of pressure. And then we start to smooth it out using a variety of brush strokes. Diagonal both ways. Now we can kind of take this horizontally and then vertically. Now I don't always follow that rule completely. I kind of look and see, how the glaze is looking on the canvas, and I'll base it off of that. Now light pressure at the end. See how I'm just dragging the brush across the surface very faintly and I'm lifting away? That's what really smooths things out at the end. So that's tip number 2. Now, another tip I want to share with you, tip number 3, is to always keep a wet edge when you're applying glazes. Always keep a wet edge. So if you're trying to cover a large area, let's say you're starting on the left-hand side, you're working your way over to the right, you're going to want to kind of smooth out one section at a time. Okay, say we have this section smooth. Then we load up our brush with the glaze, and we're going to kind of go up to the edge of that first glaze and keep that wet edge. Keep that wet edge. And see, we just kind of smooth into that first glaze like this. Now we're using the other tip, using less pressure. Okay, and we smooth that together. And then we can go ahead and load our brush again. And keep that wet edge. And we're not going back and rebrushing everything. If you do that, that's how you end up with a lot of blotchiness. But rather we just want to keep that wet edge and keep that glaze going across whatever area we happen to be painting. If we're painting a background or we're painting clothing, whatever it might be, that's how you get a nice, smooth, even application. Okay, so now that's going to take us to tip number 4, and I already kind of gave you a preview of that. I kind of demonstrated that already, but that is, don't skimp on glazes. Don't skimp on the amount of paint that's on your brush. So notice here, I've got a lot of matte medium, and I know, paint's expensive. Nobody wants to waste paint, but you're going to be saving money because you're not going to use a lot of paint. You're going to use a lot more matte medium. Again, if you buy it from Nova Color, you can get this at about 1/3 of the cost of buying it at the store. So don't skimp on your matte medium and on your glaze. So really you want to load up that brush. Look at how much I have on the brush here. You can see that it is just really, really scooped on there. I'll just show it to you on my other camera. Again, look how much paint is on that brush. All right, so we have a big dollop on the end. And when you have a big dollop on there, that means then you can really coat the surface of your canvas well and really get that in the weave of the canvas. Now you can always wipe some of the glaze off if you have too much. You just go back to your palette, just kind of wipe it off, either on your palette or if you have a rag nearby. I have a rag on my table, I can wipe that off. And then after you wipe it off, you can go ahead and smooth it out. But it's a lot easier to smooth it out. See how easy that is? Just a couple of diagonal brush strokes and you can get a nice even application. It's a lot easier to smooth it out when your canvas is completely saturated with the pigment rather than having only a little bit of paint. Now imagine I just had a little bit on here and then we end up having, what they call holidays. And holidays are just where you've got kind of the white texture of the canvas showing through. And I don't know if you can see that here with this camera. I probably would have to zoom it in just a little bit. You could see kind of the holidays here that happens when we've got not enough paint on the brush. And it's very frustrating then to try to blend when you don't have enough paint on your brush. It just can get very blotchy. So that's tip number 4. And then tip number 5 is to use the right brush for the job. So sometimes when I've taught artists in person, my in-person classes, I've noticed artists using very, very little brushes, and maybe because they're not trying to waste a lot of paint. But if you use too small of a brush, let's say you're using a little brush like this, and this isn't actually that small of a brush. You're using a 1/2 inch flat, and you're trying to do a large area. It's a lot harder to do. A lot harder to do. Let me just move that camera up there. Or let's imagine this. Let's imagine that you were using, a really minuscule flat brush like this one right here. That's even smaller than 1/4. And then you were trying to, fill in a whole area, trying to fill in a background smoothly with a small brush like this. First of all, it would take you way too long. And secondly, it would just be very, very difficult to smooth it out. I mean, you can't smooth it out, but you're going to get a lot more streakiness on this unnecessarily. So just want to make sure you're using the right brush for the job so it's not frustrating. And that's what we want to do in this process, is ease the frustration, make this technique as easy to learn and to apply as possible. So I hope these 5 different tips and techniques have helped you out. Go ahead and if you have a spare canvas, even if it's not a 16 by 20 or a canvas board, just go ahead and try this technique out a little bit. Some of the techniques I've shown you here, these tips, grab just one color, grab some matte medium, put it on your palette, and just try it out and play around with it a little bit. Get accustomed to how the acrylic glazing technique works before you actually get into your portrait. And I think that's going to help you out a lot. You'll have that knowledge before you dive into it. You'll be more accustomed to how things work. So anyway, I hope this helps. Look forward to teaching you more, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless.